Hello, my name is Beth Hirschman, and I am an associate professor in the Kinesiology and Health Department at Wright State University. And I teach in the areas of adapted physical education and physical education. Today we'll be talking about the cognitive load theory, the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, and 3 different principles that will help reduce extraneous processing, as well as refutation text with a specific example in adapted physical education. First, we're going to discuss the cognitive load theory. According to Pass and Speller in 2014, the cognitive load theory essentially discusses how we store and retain information in our working and long-term memories. This theory focuses mainly on secondary information, which is information that we have not evolved to get on our own. So we have to get this from somebody else, whether it's a teacher, an outside source, anything like that. And there are 3 main types of cognitive load that we will discuss today. The first type of cognitive load we're going to talk about today is intrinsic cognitive load. This type of load refers to complexity due to the nature of the task and information that needs to be processed. So you see in the picture here, there is a guy trying to figure out a math problem. And it's organized, it's up there for him, and all he has to do is figure it out. The second type of cognitive load is called extraneous cognitive load. This is cognitive load that is due to an inappropriate instructional design being used, and this causes more load for the learner to process. So in this case, it's going to be something that an instructor can improve on because the learner is overloaded with distracting or unorganized information. Lastly, the third type of cognitive load is called germane cognitive load. This is what's considered an effective cognitive load, meaning the working memory can attend to the intrinsic load without extraneous load or information causing the learner to struggle in grasping the information. The next theory we're going to talk about today is the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. According to Mayer, this theory follows 3 basic assumptions. First, humans process information through 2 main channels, the visual and the auditory. And depending on how the information is first presented, individuals will process the information through their visual center if they're given pictures or video, or through their auditory center if they're given words like narration, sounds, things to listen to. Our representation mode processes whether the information is presented to us verbally or non-verbally, while the sensory modality approach focuses on whether the information is presented visually or through auditory means. The second assumption in this theory is what's known as the limited capacity assumption, which is similar to the working memory in the cognitive load theory. In the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, the idea is that we are limited in the amount of information we can process in one channel at a time. So for example, if I'm trying to learn something new, I cannot have competing auditory and visual stimuli going on at the same time. I need complete quiet and no distractions in order for me to be able to process the information. The third assumption is that we follow 3 different processes when we actively process information. This is known as the active processing assumption, meaning that we select the information we pay attention to, we organize it, and then we integrate that information in our minds, transferring the relevant information through the sensory stimuli, and then into the working memory, and finally into our long-term memory store. Mayer mentions that in order for this to happen, we as teachers need to have some sort of a structure, meaning we need to be organized in how we present the information to our students. And we also need to guide our students on how to structure the information we provide them. The next thing we're going to talk about are 3 principles for reducing extraneous processing. This is done through effective instructional design, and the principles that will be discussed are essentially suggestions on how to focus the learner, increasing the amount of information a learner can commit to long-term memory. Following this discussion will be a short 3-slide presentation on inclusion in physical education, and each slide has been designed to exemplify one of the 3 principles discussed. As I go through them, try to see if you can identify which principle is being discussed or observed on each slide. The first principle I'm going to discuss is called the redundancy principle. You can see in this picture that there is a theme of redundant text in the story, especially if I were to show the slide here and then read word for word everything that's written on it, while the learners are trying to pay attention to what's actually in the picture. The redundancy principle states that a learner will learn and commit information to their long-term memory better when they are presented with graphics and text, or graphics and narration, but not all three at once. The idea is to reduce the amount of words they're having to focus on at the same time. A learner can be overloaded if he or she has to process too much information through the auditory and visual channels of cognitive processing. The second principle is the spatial contiguity principle. Let's say that I'm teaching children how to spell the names of the animals shown on the slide, and this is the first time they have seen the animals' names written down. As you can see, I have the names written beside the actual picture of the animal, so they're able to learn to associate the word with the actual picture. When following the spatial contiguity principle, an instructional designer or teacher should place the word right next to the picture to save the learner from having to visually scan back and forth across the slide. The third principle to help reduce extraneous cognitive load is what's called the signaling principle. By utilizing this principle, the teacher is pointing a learner's attention to the important components of the presentation. The idea behind this principle is that it teaches the learner to focus on the information that is important to the lesson. So in the example on this slide, if I were actually teaching a unit on proper nouns, you can see that the proper nouns are highlighted, they are bolded, they're underlined, and they're all capitalized. So it draws the learner's attention to those specific words in the paragraph. Now we're going to discuss inclusion in physical education utilizing those three principles I just discussed. So inclusion essentially means working together, and in this picture you see we have a student in a wheelchair, and the rest of the students in the picture are not in wheelchairs. So we have people with and without disabilities who are interacting together. Inclusion is not something that is mandated by law. However, students with disabilities should be put into what's called the least restrictive environment, where they can be the most successful. It might be an inclusive setting, such as what you see here in the picture, but it may also be in a more segregated setting where you only have students with disabilities together. From the picture here, you can see that inclusive and adaptive physical education do not appear to be the same. In the picture on the left, that is an inclusive setting, you have an instance where individuals both with and without disabilities are educated together. So you see one child in a wheelchair, everybody else is standing, they have no disability. In the picture on the right, this is an adapted setting, so it's a little hard to tell, but in this case, every student there is in a wheelchair, so they all have disabilities. And in the adapted setting, the student numbers typically tend to be a little bit lower because a lot of times these disabilities tend to be more severe and require more attention from the teacher versus an inclusive setting where you may have just one or two students who have a disability. The last and probably most important thing to know about physical education is that it is something that is required by law. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act mentions physical education as the only subject area where students with disabilities need to participate. This means that physical education is what's considered a direct service because it's required by law. The other category of services would be related service. In this case, those types of services are not required by law, and they are then called related services. This means that an individual may have a disability, and they might also be on an IEP, but they may not need services such as speech therapy if they are able to speak with no problem. Finally, the last thing we're going to talk about is refutation text. In this case, refutation text does three main things. It identifies a common misconception. It then gives a cue to the learner that what they may believe or perceive is wrong, essentially refuting what they previously believed. And then it will give a clarification of why that is actually incorrect. In the disability world, a lot of times people tend to think of somebody with quadriplegia as having a paralysis in all four of their limbs. So when a lot of people think about somebody who's quadriplegic, Christopher Reeve is who comes to mind. He was Superman back in the day and ended up falling off of a horse and broke his neck. So he was essentially paralyzed from the neck all the way down to his feet. And so that's the picture that most people get in their mind when they think of a quadriplegic. Let's look at this picture here. These are all people who have quadriplegia. So again, going back to what we previously talked about, it does not appear that these people have complete paralysis from the neck down. Essentially, what quadriplegic means is that they have some sort of a disability in all 4 of their limbs. It could be limited strength, it could be an amputation, it could be complete paralysis, but there are different levels of quadriplegia. There are many, many sports available for people who do have this disability. So the example you see here in the slide is wheelchair rugby, which is only for people who are quadriplegic. There are also opportunities like track and field events, racing in different marathons, things like that, that are out there for people with this disability.